John Coates, President of the Australian Olympic Committee and Vice President of the IOC. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. This is a very special association I have with water polo, so I'm pleased to share a few recollections.
John, can you tell us about the lead up and the journey to getting women's water polo included for the first time in the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games?
Yeah, it certainly was not something that FINA was supporting, and the IOC's position at the time was that they'd put a cap on the number of athletes in games of 10,200, and Sydney was instructed accordingly that unless FINA swimming with all its disciplines was to find some room in there, it wouldn't happen. But that didn't stop Leanne Barnes and didn't stop Pat Jones and everybody else, and didn't stop the girls themselves. And pleasingly, they kept the pressure on. We wanted it, obviously, the Australian Olympic Committee, and SOCOG wanted it, but was restrained. I think where it really came to a head was when we had a visit of the Coordination Commission led by, in time to be the president of the IOC, Jack Rogge, and the girls were both at the airport and at the Maritime Centre when we went into our meeting there, and they looked like they were dressed to play water polo, and the pressure came on at the right time, and Mustafa Lafawi, the president of FINA, had made it very clear it wasn't going to happen under his watch. But we were very, I think the embarrassment that he was caused particularly certainly took its showed. And on the same day as that happened, that night, I went on a bus trip with Mustafa, and we were inspecting venues, and I said, look, really, you're going to have to do this. And the outcome of that bus trip was that we're inspecting venues, as I said, was that if I could give him support for synchronized diving, then we might find a way to do this. And then what really got it over the line is that President Samaranch from Spain, great water polo nation, and someone who was very keen to address the inequality between men and women at the Olympic Games. My guess is we were probably under 40. We would have been under 40% females in Sydney. We're going into the next Games on almost 50-50. He was keen to address that, and so he made a phone call that night and made it very clear that the IOC would find the extra places, and that's when it happened. And so we found the extra places, and the girls became an intrinsic part of the Sydney Olympics, and they joined other sports, having their first games. Triathlon was the first in Sydney, taekwondo was the first in Sydney, and other events. And so it's part of history now, but it was a long struggle for the girls, one that frankly they shouldn't have been put to.
And John, an amazing journey when getting to the Games there at 2000 and women's water polo being part of the Games for the first time. How was it accepted by the FINA and swimming aquatic disciplines community and also the general public?
General public, we had 15,000 there at the final. We had probably 15,000 in the Gladesville Hotel when we celebrated with our girls. So no question about the public and the media and the broadcasters. I think FINA, they hopped on board. There's no doubt about it. Once they knew, and once the traditional water polo community understood that this wasn't taking the spots away from the men, they hopped on board. Another great champion of it all during this period was Peter Montgomery, who was my vice president and deputy chef de mission, and he'd been the chair of the FINA Water Polo Technical Committee, and when he was constantly rebuffed, he put it to them that, well, you know, if you don't do this, then places will be taken from the men and you'll be forced to do it. And whether that was one of the things that got him over the line, I don't know. But it was just, the girls were being treated as second-class citizens. And it's in all of the debates on equal representation for women, and my sport was the same, rowing, we were probably 38% female and competitors only. They always used to talk about inequity, the equity of it. And so in some sports, they looked at the pool of athletes who were competing in the sport and said, well, that's what you should judge it on. And sure, there were less women participating in the sport back then. And I changed this with the IOC, I said, it's not about equity, it's about equality. And if you don't set the bar and you don't say we're going to aspire to equality in the number of athletes and have the same events, you'll never get there. You fix that and more kids will be playing, more females will be playing, and that's what's happened here. You know how popular the game is amongst the schools and in all the junior competitions. And so I think there's been a change of thinking.
And that equality across the board in the Olympic movement, how proud of you of that as one of the legacies that you've driven for many, many years?
I'm very proud of that. The Olympics is it wasn't quite discrimination, but we're all about non-discrimination, whatever form that might take. But we are all about equality, and I'm very pleased that for the Tokyo Games that where I'm sort of leading it for the IOC, we've achieved it, and I think everyone understands now the importance, and everyone understands the benefits. It's a better event. In Australia, you see great pride now being exhibited in the netball community, in the women's football, those sports, rugby league or rugby union. There's an Olympic sport now with the girls' sevens. That was the last one. But we've led the way, the Olympic movement, with hockey, and Australia's led the way with hockey, water polo, and now the women's sevens. And it's nothing new for us, female participation, and I'm pleased everyone supports and understands that.
Let's go back to the night where you've already mentioned there was 15,000 people at Sydney Olympic Park, and there was 15,000 people probably in the Gladesville Hotel afterwards. We've done a few of these interviews over the last couple of weeks. Peter Kerr told us he was sitting one side of the Prime Minister. You were probably sitting the other side. Nicola Johnson was a table official that night. She's now going to be an Olympic referee next year. Tell us about the moment for you when Yvette Higgins scored the winning goal.
Yeah, well, it's we were down a couple of times in that game from memory, notwithstanding all of Liz Weeks' heroics, and we kept coming back, and then you never allow yourself to be overconfident in those situations, or I didn't, and so I sort of had my head down, and then 1.5 seconds to go, whoosh, Yvette lets one go. And it was just unbelievable. And it was just the joy, the Howards, Mr. and Mrs. Howard, and everyone else who were there celebrating with us. I guess if Kathy Freeman carried the weight of expectation of the nation that night in the 400, this was the justification for the fight that. Leanne and Pat and the girls themselves had all displayed. This was the justification to show this is a great game, this is worth having in the Olympics. And so there's not relief in the same way, but as I say, justification, and we're here to stay. That was the message that I got. And they were very tearful moments, those, for any official. And I can imagine want to know how the families of those girls and how the water polo community felt at the time. And then we saw that when we went up to the Gladesville Hotel that night. It was enough. Peter Montgomery, as my deputy, always takes the view that I could let go one night and he's got to stay sober. So he hadn't had a drink for the whole of the games, which was not like him. And I remember he said, "Catesy, I'm going to have one tonight." And we did. And then I think the other memory was the girls coming in and jumping across the bar tables as they came in. And it was their night. They deserved it. And the water polo community celebrated as one.
And obviously they became the golden girls of the sport. And how pleasing is it for you that, as you said, they were here to stay, and they're still here to stay right now? That rivalry between the USA women's team and our Aussie Stingers women's team goes right through to today, and probably is a big rivalry going into Tokyo next year. How pleasing is that for you and the legacy they've left the sport?
Yeah, it's acknowledged the significance of that game and event by the Americans, and they are still our number one competitor. They sent me a book about that, the silver lining for them, the story of how they got in the games, and then the greatest game of all, they called it. Certainly the most significant. And it's pleasing we've continued it. In London, I presented the bronze medals to our girls, and they're a very special part of our Australian Olympic team now, and we certainly got them up amongst our medal hopefuls for Tokyo.
John Coates, thank you so much for joining us, and I think I speak on behalf of the entire water polo community. Thank you for everything you've done for water polo over the many years through the journey from 2000 women's inclusion right through to today. Thanks, John.
My great pleasure, and may it continue. Cheers.